Good evening. Thanks to everybody for coming out. Thanks to everyone watching on the live stream. Thanks to everyone who's hearing Clewell in your heads right now, aghast at the very idea of the live stream. On the demon box? Wherever you are, welcome. I'm Murray Farish. I'm the chair of the English department and the director of creative writing here at Webster. If it feels a little absurd to be holding a memorial event for someone 2 years after his death, let's all agree that a lot of things about the last 2 years have been absurd, right? One of the only things that wasn't absurd was our genuine desire, and that's the English departments and the universities and David's family's desire to do this thing for David together, right? And to do it safely. And so here we are now, and we thank you for your patience, and we thank you for being here. So here's the program for the evening. First, the chancellor, and then the president will join us to speak about their experiences and relationships with David and what he meant to the university. Then I got a couple of things I want to talk with you about. And then we have a lovely video. And then David's son, Ben, is going to speak to us. And then we get to the most important part of the evening where we can all get up out of our seats and mingle around together and remember together and laugh and cry and tell stories together. And best of all, eat deviled eggs together, right? The way he would have wanted it done. So with that, to whet your appetite, it's my honor to turn the podium over to Webster University's Chancellor, Dr. Beth Strobel.
Well, thank you, Murray, for helping us come together for this occasion to celebrate one whom we had often celebrated. While the time that I shared at Webster with David Clewell was brief compared to so many in this community, I recall well my first awareness and communication with David. It was an email that I sent to him on March 10th, 2010, being my first year at Webster, congratulating him on being named the Missouri Poet Laureate. Of course, that recognition and the unusual and expanded presence that it created for the work that David already enjoyed was the vehicle for this writer of poems and this amazing human being to live in the tradition of poets laureate, and to do so with the heart and soul of a true teacher, and of course in David's signature style. David himself said he thought of the role as poet laureate as sort of a roving ambassador for the art of poetry. Well, it's worth noting, as we look at David's career at Webster, that when Webster first launched 30 years ago this spring, with the support of the Kemper Foundation, the annual Awards of Teaching Excellence back in 1992, and this is a tradition that continues this year, 30 years later, David was an honoree in that inaugural year. David also holds the distinction of being one of only 2 Webster faculty members who have been invited to speak at the fall faculty dinner twice, in 1999 and again in 2010. As I read articles and interviews from this moment when David served as poet laureate, I loved reading the story about how his son Ben, 14 at the time, and a creator then, I don't know if now, of graphic novels, tantalized with the idea of creating the character of poetry overlord if his father took on the role of poet laureate. Well, David did take on the role, and I don't know whether Ben created the character of poetry overlord, but it is image to ponder, isn't it? Revere and perhaps fear. Well, as an aside, that caused me to think about my own love of young adult literature. During the time when I taught adolescents at a high school English, high school in rural Illinois, And that love for young adult literature grew as I taught classes later as a professor and taught young adult literature for future English teachers. It's not surprising to anyone that loves young adult literature that those novels, when they are set in a classroom setting, almost always have a teacher who's a favorite character, and of course it's an English teacher. YA novels are usually marketed to adolescents, although not exclusively, and they feature characters that are in the age range and those with whom young adolescents would interact, often teachers. Well, it's been said that YA literature provides both windows and mirrors, ways for readers to learn about themselves and to see others. Well, that may be just as true for readers who are English teachers as well as young adults themselves. In many of these novels, the English teacher is the one who, through the quirks of personality and the shared discovery and meaning-making activity of reading and writing, reaches those students who may be outcasts and outsiders to the enforced, peer-driven norms of conformity. This experience of outreach to those students can truly be the joy of any English teacher and a teacher of English teachers, and dare I say, likely the joy of being a professor of creative writing. And so as I reflect on David Clewell as professor, what my husband, Paul Strobel, and I both know, and Paul more deeply than I, because David actually helped him with his first book of poetry, was the generosity with which David, professor, poet, encouraged the love of poetry, the reading of poetry, the listening to poetry, the writing of poetry. And I think what an experience it must have been to be one of David's students. And in some ways, we all were. David himself remembered two English teachers from his high school days who first introduced him to Whitman. Not the anthologized Whitman, but the Whitman that spoke to an adolescent heart and soul. And he described these two teachers in this way. His freshman English teacher was, quote, a wonderful guy who was a complete nut in the richest sense of things. And another teacher who would ride her motorcycle in from the village, Motorcycle Irene. And we're not talking about some young and lithesome person. She was at least 60. Well, that sounds to me like the characters of a compelling young adult novel, or in David's case, a compelling young adult life, which was the foundation for much of his life that compelled all of us who were touched by him, his teaching, and his poetry. I reflect on David's life and how much I miss him. And I think about the term laureate as used in Poet Laureate, and it takes on new meaning for me now. Laurels, laureate, are evergreens, and thus those leaves symbolize, and the word symbolizes not only an accomplishment, but the recognition of an accomplishment that has lasting character and quality. So today, I celebrate what I knew and know about David, what I admired and still admire about David. Poet laureate, teacher laureate, human laureate. And now I will ask my colleague and partner in leadership, President Julian Schuster, to add his words about David Clewell.
Thank you, Beth. I'm not going to even try to follow your, I would say, scholarly and elaborate memory and tribute to David. I would just like to follow up on one point. First time when I saw David was in August of 2010. We were sharing the table during the faculty dinner. And long time ago, I also wanted and tried to write poetry, and I thought at that point of time how good fortune is for me to sit next to somebody who lives what he writes. the poetry. This conversation never took place, but conversation could have been like this, because dinner was in I think in Science Center, yeah, planetarium. So just imagine science and poetry. And while this conversation didn't take place, it could have gone like this. The economist, me, would ask him, how come, that this dinner is taking place in science? And David would look at me and says, but science is just a kind of a poetry, isn't it? And before I would say anything, he would say, but do not forget, poetry is the science as well. That was my impression of David. David was a poet, but he was also a very pragmatic when he wanted to be. He incessantly, in a determined way, argued for something that he firmly believed would be for the benefit of students. He argued for a faculty position, and he did not let go. His words still resonates with me, and these were the words that he shared with us in such a generous way. And they were always about others. I met David many times, came across, but more somewhere else than at the university, in the nearby. Every other day when I would go over there to Schnucks to buy a couple of things, there was somebody who resembled there is, of course, more notable resemblances that which I am going to mention to you. I know that the students from, Beth just told me, from Nervings associated David for a very good reason with Walt Whitman. I associated him with a big polar bear going to the Isles of Schnucks and spending a lot of time at the grocery department. He never bought a lot of things. He always bought a very few things, which I noticed in his cart. He is also a person, and for me that's hard actually. This is a person with whom I never argued. The closest we came to the argument was in Schnucks, when I told him, and there will be a trouble. Everybody who reads his poetry would know that was directly from his poem. And he even didn't look at me, and he says, and it's sure there will be. Everybody looked at us, thinking, what are they going to really go into the fight there or not? And we just smiled, and parted. Next to the final thing I would like to share with you, today, by coincidence, today is a big day for humankind. Today is the day when the first human being went into the space. And nothing is more appropriate to have Webster's astronaut or cosmonaut, David Clewell, looking upon us with his big, generous smile. He has been, he will be, the true astronaut of Webster University forever. And with the last, I remember one story about the great German poet Goethe, who was walking, in the Lower Saxony with one of his pupils, and allow me to say, local duke was passing by. And Goethe did not budge, as we would say now. And the pupil said, but the Duke said hi and you did not respond. And the Goethe says, there will be plenty of Dukes, but there is only one Goethe. So allow me to finish. There has been, and there will be a lot of presidents at this university, but there will always be only one David Clewell.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Beth. One of my favorite poems from David's last book ends like this. My uncompromising reader there at the beginning, never less than tough on me. What I really want to know is, have you had enough yet? Well, no. I've not had enough yet. I got to be his student and his pal and his correspondent and his colleague and his friend for 25 years almost, and I have not had enough yet. And I don't know anyone who's had enough yet. He taught for a long time, right? I mean, I'm sure there were some people out there who were like, that Clewell guy, right? But at least they had the good sense not to say that out loud, right? At least around us. How can you get enough? And it wasn't like he was stingy, right? I mean, he gave and gave from that seemingly endless store of Clewellian goods, and still we wanted more, right? I was so greedy for more Clewell in the early years of our association that I even offered to help him move when he and his family bought their house in Webster Groves. Now, you think about that. How many people would you want to help move? Well, let's leave y'all out of this, okay? Who on earth would I willingly and ungrudgingly and full-heartedly help move? Listen, my own son has been moving out of the house this past week, and I've been like, Dad's kind of busy, pal. Just a couple of trips, David said. The movers are getting the big stuff. No problem, I said. Really, I appreciate it so much, David said. Just a couple of trips for the valuables. And 3 days later, we were all done. And, because I'm always talking about Clewell, I've told this story before, occasionally to, outsiders. And I've sometimes gotten reactions along the lines of, oh, I'm so sorry your teacher took advantage of you that way. And I don't understand that. I guess the problem is that I don't have the powers to recreate what it was like to be let in that way. Right? Not taken in, not taken for a ride, not taken advantage of, but let in. And yes, it was cool to see the valuables that I was helping him move, right? The alien lamps and the Charlie the Tuna bathroom scales, the stacks of flying saucer ashtrays, the diner signs, ready kilowatt wall clocks, mysterious JFK assassination documents. These things may actually have been evidence, I'm not sure. Beatnik ephemera, Betty Page shot glasses, Bigfoot movie posters, vintage hats, thousands of t-shirts. It was both daunting and incredible to see all of the books in that house. Wall-wide, floor-to-ceiling bookcases in room after room after room, books going down the stairs, books in the bathrooms, books in the landings, books in the hallways. Y'all, this man had books in his kitchen cabinets. It was amazing. And I don't know, maybe I was just a dumb brute in those days, especially suited for box hauling, but it didn't feel like that. And I sure didn't feel like I was being taken advantage of. I was taking too much in. David kept apologizing every time we made another trip. I was like, what are you apologizing for? I'm learning here, right? I talk a lot about being David's student because even though I spent the last 2 decades of his life in pretty much daily conversation with the man, and even though we became, and it's one of the great, great honors of my life, dear friends, I was always also David's student. And maybe this says more about me than it does about him. I don't know. David was certainly never pedantic or professorial, but once you've been his student, once you've had that experience and been a witness to that enthusiasm and tried and failed and sometimes succeeded at meeting those standards, right? Well, you just don't ever really walk away from that. David taught poetry, yes. Right? And that was and that is very important to us. Right? But if you're like me on my best days, right, it's more than poetry. It's even more than poetry. For those of you who didn't have the privilege to be his student, one of David's favorite ways to start a class, and it was such a generous way to do things, was, he would hold up the book or the photocopy, whatever the class was reading that day, and say, so what stays with you from this? What stays with us, student or not, from knowing David Clewell? Deep and abiding gratitude for whatever force or quirk or rhythm of the universe brought us into his orbit. Those books, a dozen of them, that stand up to the work of any American poet of his time. And yet, how humble he was to have been a door-to-door street fighter for poetry. Not his, right, but other people's. And for what poems can do for us, how they can rearrange a few of our molecules, right? How they can change your life. Those books. And how we can go back to them for our own versions of forever. How he cared infinitely more about making poems than he did about being a poet and about playing the po-biz game. His enthusiasm, his curiosity, his commitment. What stays with us? How it is not only okay, but absolutely necessary for a well-educated person of the late 20th and early 21st centuries to retain the ability to be astonished, surprised, delighted. How many of us, before we encountered David, really allowed ourselves on a regular basis to be delighted? How many of us even knew how? Understood delight's habits of mind? The gifts that David would give. Right? David was one of the world's great gift givers. And when he gave you a gift, it wasn't just something he'd grabbed in a random hurry. Right? You knew that when he put an object in your hands, he thought of you. Could he be grumpy? Could things occasionally set him off? Yes, but again, he had standards. And who had a higher capacity to love? What stays with us are the methods and the practices of attention, the devotional attention to the world, the great good humor, the open heart, the joy. How many of us, before we knew Clewell, had ever had as effective or infectious a model of genuine human joy? What stays with us is how we could only try to match his energy. David was a perpetual motion machine of his own ingenious crackpot devising, ready to turn your potential kinetic with a kind word, the right book recommendation at the right time, or the occasional kick in the butt. What stays with us? How charming he was, how smart, how knowledgeable, how wise, how we love him, how lucky we are. Zach, play the video. Huh?
Well, again, it's one of those propositions. If I had a buck for every time, Clewell writes about weird things, spontaneous human combustion, the flying saucers, whatever all it is. I think that I don't consciously think about it when I'm start working on a piece, but so often what begins to tumble out in notes or notebooks would sort of gravitate toward this idea of what does it take for certain people to believe and believe in that helps them along and make it one day to the next, whether it's physical survival in some cases, but certainly emotional and psychic survival. So I'm not trying to write encyclopedia entries on strange phenomenon. You know, I don't want a cable channel show with the ghost hunters, the monster questers, and everybody else glommed into one. But in some of those extreme situations, I think what fascinates me most is less an encyclopedia entry and what are we really talking about human being-wise here. Can I pick up? The voice on the other end of the phone is already off and running. You were right, man. You were so incredibly right. And now I'm more than sorry I didn't believe you when you claimed the only way to keep their voices out of our heads was by using heavy-duty aluminum foil, the kind our own mothers went crazy for when it came to preparing leftovers for their deep freeze oblivion. You tried to tell me regular foil's too thin for making any kind of proper headgear. A ponderous buffer zone helmet, or something less obtrusive and more stylish, say a wave-deflecting beret. Listen, next time I visit, I'll bring enough of the extra strength for us both. And although this sounds like something I certainly might have suggested, perhaps only to my closest friends, it's true, it happens that I didn't. And finally, he stops to worry up a whisper, "This isn't my friend Stuart, is it?" And I say, "No," and he says, "Oh my God, man, they've gone and gotten through to you, haven't they?" As if he's the one who can't believe what he's hearing, who's never felt so disconnected, standing in the middle of whatever room he's renting in his suddenly less than accommodating life. There's no way he can appreciate how accidentally he's reached me, how sympathetic I really am. The one other person who might think it's worth trying. This last-ditch defense against the aliens or the in-laws or those frightening late-night infomercial people. It's after midnight again, when everything that comes along is that much harder to resist, and where I've come to live more often than I'd like, just a single touch-tone button away, apparently, from the madhouse.
Yeah. Let's talk about the beginner of somebody who's beginning to send out. Yeah. Because one of the things that in classes I think is so important too, we have such an emphasis on publishing things instead of writing things, and particularly for an undergraduate or in or out of school, the notion is just to write your heart out and work hard with it. Have a favorite poem? I think probably one of the most important poems to me personally, I don't know if it's favorite, but it would certainly qualify as a favorite, would be Richard Hugo's Degrees of Grey in Phillipsburg, of somebody else's poem, contemporary. Now, if you mean of my poems,
yeah, and of yours,
the right answer to that, I know the answer to this question. The answer is the poem that I'm working on now.
This poem isn't an intricate theory, years in the making. This poem can speak only for this poem. This poem will tell you it's not what you think. This poem's nothing more than a series of coincidences. This poem can't help but attract the occasional crackpot. This poem is offered in full compliance with the Freedom of Information Act. This poem's not anything like the official version. This poem's holding back. This poem's covering up. This poem may be afraid of worldwide panic. This poem's no secret prototype the government is testing. This poem has powerful friends behind it. This poem is something you'd be happier not knowing. This poem is murder on reliable eyewitnesses. This poem's counting on your complete cooperation. This poem can put you at the scene of untold crimes, or this poem's your ironclad alibi. But the line, absolutely the coolest thing for me about poetry, as a reader, to see how that affects the music and the content, and certainly as a writer. It's the thing that keeps me in it. Even though I'm only staying the night, I have a sinking feeling there's going to be trouble. The real guests are talking it up in the living room, as if this is truly the life. What more could people want so far from home than to have every bit of their weariness and hunger taken so personally? Why would anyone settle for less? When they checked in and filled out that card with way too much space for "tell us all about yourself," I bet they were more than happy to oblige. I can hear them, even now, while I'm writing down the only thing I'm sure of after my name and my actual address. I can already tell there's no way I deserve this kind of attention. I travel for the thrill of asserting what I can't be expected to know. Because I enjoy the molecular rearrangement that being a stranger occasions, I don't necessarily want to feel as if I'm somehow fitting into the familiar chambers of my life one more time. It's as if my Aunt Ida suddenly was named the nation's hotelier. And from now on, no such thing as too much potpourri, too many of those giant ceramic pitchers on hallway tables, dried flowers sprouting from the mouths of all the usual antiques in the land. Aunt Ida in St. Louis, Salt Lake City, Sausalito, New Orleans, Aunt Ida beckoning from every porch swing throughout charm-smitten New England. Poetry is born of the tradition of shamans, priests, and sacred psalmists, and it takes wing in story and in song and in prayer. And what it mainly wants to do is name those feelings, those heart feelings, and those thoughts that so otherwise seem unnameable. And we lend our own names for as long as we can, as long as we're alive. We lend those names to the world. Poet Billy Collins said, one of the first things that you want to do, or that a poem asks you to do, is to slow down. So in a long-winded answer to your question, if I've taught some of these people, even say the greenest of the green, in approaching a poem, slow down, turn off all your electronic devices, figuratively, literally, anything else, slow it down. I really think that is a good use of time. I'm very happy to be able to teach literature classes too. And literature, small L, not literature, literature classes. Because again, that's where you're going to learn about this stuff. I mean, even if your main aim is to say, how do I write this better? So a good concentrated dose of the reading and talking about it. And I think the ability to read something as a writer, which is not an original phrase with me, is different than somebody just as a student or a critic or a generalized reader. Because when you're writing, or when you want to write, when you are a writer, you can't help but wonder with one track of your brain, how did he get from A to B? So I teach at my best, on my best days anyway, how to make that as real a part of the process of reading as possible. Did he just say, one small step for man? I told him it had to be for a man, or else that mankind bit seems absolutely senseless. Any notion of symmetry and scale, shot to hell. To say nothing of humility, the stepping, the leaping, the one guy, the many. Like every gung-ho flyboy, he's at his best in the air. He's not used to saying much that doesn't come up banged out on the ground. He made it to the goddamn moon, and with 600 million people watching on TV, he flubs the one line he couldn't stop rehearsing all the way out here. I think one of the things that, as a reader, always strikes me truly is in the hands of a poet who's showing me something in a way that I've never thought about it before. But now that she's asking me to consider it this way, by, say, the example of her poem, I have that feeling as a reader that says, wow, that seems so right. The tofu that's shown up overnight in this house is frightening, proof of the law of conservation, matter that simply cannot be created or destroyed. Matter older than Newton, who knew better than to taste it, older than Lao Tzu, who thought about it but finally chose harmonious non-interference. I'd like to be philosophical too, see it as some kind of pale, inscrutable wisdom among my hot dogs, the cold chicken, the leftover deviled eggs, but I'm talking curdled soybean milk, and I don't have that kind of energy. I'd rather not be part of the precariously metaphorical wedding of modern physics and those ancient Eastern mysteries, but still, whoever stashed the tofu in my Frigidaire had better come back for it soon. I'm not Einstein, but I'm smart enough to know a bad idea when I see it, taking up space, biding its time. Like so much that demands our imperfect attention amid the particle roar of this world, it's going nowhere fast.
A huge thank you to Karen Birch from Webster's Global Marketing and Communications Group for putting that video together and for arranging the photographs and building all the graphics. Thank you that you're seeing behind the speakers tonight. If I may, just for a moment, a little bit of business. All right? One of David's favorite things about his job here at Webster, and something that he took tremendous pride in, was the Webster University Visiting Writer Series. David started the series in 1986, and over the years, he and his colleagues brought nationally and internationally renowned writers and poets to the Webster University campus. We've had Pulitzer Prize winners, National Book Award winners, Booker Prize winners, Neustadt Prize winners, Story Prize winners. We've had winners of the MacArthur Genius Grant. We've had U.S. Poets Laureate, and we probably should have had at least one Nobel Prize winner. Go to Stockholm and argue with somebody. Next fall, Stockholm, Oslo, anyway. Next fall, the Creative Writing Program will rename and rededicate the Visiting Writer Series as the David Clewell Visiting Writer Series at Webster University. To do that, we are asking for your help. Your gifts to the Clewell series will help us to continue to bring the caliber of writers that David attracted over the years. We want to expand the opportunities that students have to meet with and learn from visiting writers through things like workshops and craft talks. And as the English department moves next year into the new College of Humanities and Social Sciences, we want to use the Clewell series to help deepen our connection to the St. Louis literary community and to readers metro-wide as part of the new college's mission to bring the humanities to the public. A giving page for the series has been established at webstergives.webster.edu, and flyers are strategically placed all around the building tonight to give you more information about how to help and support the Clewell series. The fund is growing as we speak, but I wanted to say a special thank you to some donors who helped us get started with substantial gifts. Dwight Bidekoffer and Luke Pritchard and Nancy Powers Pritchard. So they're all here tonight, I think. Let's give them a hand. Right? Sorry, Nancy. If you are able, and interested in joining Nancy and Luke and Dwight and others. And thanks to you all who have given already. Please get a flyer. It's got what I heard recently referred to as one of those squiggle boxes on it that you can take a picture of and find the link. Or come see me while we're, receptioning here in a little bit. One more quick and happy announcement. Thanks to the efforts of all of our department faculty, thanks to our students and their ongoing support of what we do in the English department, and thanks to the confidence shown in us by Julian and Beth and the rest of the university leadership. The English department and the creative writing program will be welcoming in the fall a new full-time tenured track professor, Dr. Elizabeth Hoover. Elizabeth will teach poetry and creative nonfiction and, small L literature courses. Right? Her first book of poems, The Archive is All in Present Tense, will be published this October. So we'll all get together again, please, to celebrate that. Elizabeth's going to be a wonderful colleague and a wonderful teacher and poet here at Webster, and we can't wait to get the chance to work with her and for all y'all to get the chance to meet her. So look forward to that in fall of '22. Now, as many of you know, it was a truth universally acknowledged. Is Sheila here yet? At least around St. Louis, that you did not want to follow David Clewell on a stage. Right? I've seen people try. It never went well for them. It wasn't their fault. Right? It was just bad decision making. I've never seen anyone try it twice. I set the line up tonight the way I did because I have no intention of following our next speaker. A Webster University alum, in his day, one of our town's premier babysitters, flea market sidekick, fisherman extraordinaire, husband of Mallory, son of Patricia and David. Please welcome my friend, Ben Clewell.
Oh, thank you so much, everybody. I actually did not rehearse any bit of a script. I didn't even know if I could get up in front of you all today. It's been 2 years, but it feels like a lot shorter, and it feels like a lot longer. And this right now, it's so beautiful. I am so grateful for everybody here, for everybody who spoke. Mallory, look at all your gang right here in the third row. There's so much support and so much beauty. My dad has left such an impact on so many people. You know, when anybody loses one of their loved ones, it can feel like they're gone, but it can feel like they're there. And I feel like my dad is everywhere. He is in me. He's in the students and the people around him that he's touched. He's in the soul of the guy at the hot dog stand at the Belleville Flea Market who he would eagerly hype up. What is Carl up to? How's his mom doing? And he would sprint up there over to that stand and they'd chat it out. He's in his work. I was looking over his books of poems, especially these last few days, and there are so many beautiful pieces. And he's in that. I just am blown away by everybody here, and I'm barely holding it together. I'm so moved. I'd like to read a poem from Blessings in Disguise here, part 4, Inheritance, of one of his series, As Far as the Eye Can See, talking about his dad as well. You and I used to talk for hours about how things might have turned out differently if our fathers had belonged a little more to us before we lost them. Another strange word we learned to say. In our minds, we'd try them on again like the ideas of gloves we guess we would have grown to love. These days, we'd rather talk about our lives the way they've really been. Sometimes we take them too personally. The occasional rattle in your chest that makes you nervous. Why I get upset each time I lose my train of thought. And when we catch each other in the act of flirting with the ludicrous, we laugh so hard we can barely breathe. We blame it on the only facts that we had to start with. No wonder that we're friends. We've worked hard for what we've found out since, and we still call each other up when we stumble on the smallest new detail. Trap door in the attic, back east, the stash of magazines and stale tobacco, 78s in a junk shop with your last name on the sleeves. An obscure uncle who calls from the airport between flights and refers to something he assumes I knew only too well. We share discoveries as if they belong to us, both as if they were bits of arcane lore we've tricked into the daylight. We're curious about anything that shows up in our faces, in how we shake our heads and we laugh and stab our fingers in the air, why I'm drawn to magicians and old hotels, why you'd rather always take the long walk home. Anything that might help us to sort the rumors passed on in the blood and factor them minus or plus, to make our own lives a more exact science. What we don't know could fill books, and we still go to sleep at night trying to read every story backwards. Our official inheritance, your father's winter scarf, my father's fedora, we'll put them on when we know more about the rest. We don't need yet another unconfirmed report that we are our father's sons, especially when it seems we are born to be brothers, hapless initiates in the holy order of everything that goes without saying. There is so much that goes without saying with my father. I could, growing up, having him, be so close in his words and his emotions, how he taught me to love the world and the little things around me. Like the way that Whitman or Seinfeld would both be about the minutiae of the things, the world that we actually live in. The show about everything, the show about nothing in this way. Whether it was going out fishing, he could sit for 12 hours along with me, waiting for that one bass to bite. He could be walking along the same rows of Ready the Clewell memorabilia over at the Belleville Flea Market, and then he could be off the earth. So much moon work, so much reading about the newest discovery in space exploration or quantum theory or anything in between. Everything was a morsel. Everything was beautiful. And then he would plant down in his affectionately named dream chair over in the living room, and he would sit, and everything that he would work on, it was astounding. Sentences, couple of lines, a stanza for 24 hours, 48 hours, taking all of that attention and all of that love for the world that he was in and the people that he got to spend his life with, and bringing it to us in a way that will stay with us forever. I could not be more grateful to have had this man as my father, and I'm just so moved that all of you are here. Thank you for your beautiful words, and thank you for being here with us tonight. It really means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, so much. You see what I mean, right? I do have to follow Ben, though, for just a moment to say thank you to some people who helped make this event tonight happen. So in no order other than the alphabetical, let me say thank you to Karen Birch, Ben and Patricia Clewell, Katie Deckman, Kelly Dotman, Caitlin Fornes, Chris Hausler, Mike Halsizer, Stacy Hutchins, Kim Jackson, Zach Cromer, Trinity Locke, Joan Matt, Mike Ryan, Julian Schuster, Logan Staggs, Beth Strobel, and Katie Watkins. Thank you to David's friends and colleagues in the English department, the best people anyone could ever work with. Carla Armbruster, Ann McElhaney, Sheila Huang, and Karen Miller. And thank you all so much. Don't tell me Clewell can't still draw a crowd, all right? Thank you very much for coming out tonight. I can't wait to get down from here and hang out with you all, so let's, go and do that now. Thank you.